down this road towards global mobility system, a sustainable global mobility system. I'm going to invite the next panel up, and let me ask Paul Simons from the IEA to take over.
Thank you. Do I sit on the side?
Wherever you want.
So while our panel gets organized, I'm delighted to be with you here this afternoon. The International Energy Agency acts as a global authority, a source of statistics, data, and analysis on the entire energy transition. And from our perspective, decarbonizing transport is one of the most thorny and challenging tasks ahead. Transport accounts for about 28% of final energy demand, about 23% of global CO2 emissions from fuel consumption. It accounts for about 65% of global final oil demand. And taking a look at decarbonization, we focused both on electric vehicles more broadly through our participation in the electric vehicles initiative run by the Clean Energy Ministerial, but we've also taken a very close look lately at trucking, because trucking is particularly hard nut to crack. What are we going to require in general? We'll require a change in the nature and the structure of transport demand. First of all, some tremendous improvements in efficiency as well as logistics. And finally, rapid transitions in the actual energy mix that's used to move people and goods. So, and as I mentioned before, we're doing fairly well in electric vehicles, up to a stock of light passenger vehicles, up to a stock of about 2 million vehicles this year. A lot of political support, especially in Europe, as well as in China and India. But decarbonizing these long-distance transition modes are really the tough ones. Aviation, heavy-duty trucking, busing, and shipping. And that's why we have such a distinguished panel with us today. Matt, Paulus, and Karen. And with no further ado, I will turn it over to Matt, the Secretary of the California Environmental Protection Agency, for some brief opening remarks. Matt?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you a little bit about what's going on in California right now. I'll just say that as California looks at climate change and how we can respond to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in California, we understand that the transport sector is really the area that we need to focus. Up to about 40% of California's greenhouse gas emissions come out of the transportation system. And so we know that we need to make fundamental changes in that in transportation in California. Part of that is zero-emission vehicles, and was mentioned, we've got ambitious policies in California. We want 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles on the roads in California by 2025. Frankly, since 2011, we've surpassed I think about 325,000 sales of zero-emission vehicles or plug-in hybrids. So we feel like we're making progress in zero-emission vehicles, but we know there's an awful lot more to do. We need to provide the infrastructure for zero-emission vehicles, and by that I mean electric vehicles, but also the fuel cell vehicles that are out on the road today. So we are providing the infrastructure. We're also providing financial incentives to consumers to buy those cars. We're funding those programs out of our cap and trade program. So we're working on light-duty vehicles and doing what we can to promote zero-emission vehicles and their use in California. But we're also working on the freight sector as well. Freight also adds, and goods movement adds significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to clean up that freight sector. And so our goal is to reduce emissions by at least 25% in the freight sector by 2025. We're working on with our ports and increase the use of electric vehicles in the ports and goods movement in the ports as well. So it's something that we know is vital to the state. It's something that we know we need to focus on in order to deal with our greenhouse gas emissions. We also need to just improve, I think, public transportation as well. And so we're working on promoting high-speed rail in California as a cleaner option to transportation. And so there are just a variety of approaches that we're taking to deal with promoting sustainable transportation in the state. And as the rest of the afternoon goes on, we can talk a little bit more about the specifics.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Let's turn now to Paulus, who's been a real pioneer in the biofuels industry in Indonesia, making contributions there to decarbonization, in particular of the trucking sector. Paulus, would you like to give us a little introduction?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, in Indonesia, we started to have research for the biofuels in the 1980s. But at the time, our aim is to have the energy security done. But after the 2005, the government is so serious to have a large program to plan the Tjakrawan, to have the biodiesel at the time. And then we started with some industries over there, and we started to produce the bioethanol and biodiesel at the time. So the aim, it is, of course, first, energy security, then the poverty alleviation, then, of course, to reducing the greenhouse gas emission. So since then, and then we, as an industry, form the association. It is this association, together with government, working together to set up everything, the regulation and also the standard. And then now, after the 10 years, right, we using 20% mandatory. Maybe we are one of the ambitious country in the world, using B20 in our countries. But it is implemented now since 2015, end of 2015. Now today we are using, last year we were using 3 million kiloliter of biodiesels and throughout Indonesia, and 20% B20, and then it was reducing about 8.8 million CO2 ton, CO2 equivalent. It means 15% reducing the emission, actually, CO2. But of course, the challenge is a lot, right? About technically how to match with the requirement from the automotive industry, of course, with the price. As you know that we have a problem with the price, since the biodiesel's price now is higher than the fossil fuel price. But the government and the private sector set up what's so-called a palm oil fund to support this program, and then now it's worked well today. And then what is happened in Indonesia regarding the poverty alleviation, and this program, including the farmer, small farmer, is about 290,000 people involved in this business, and also in the upstream. In the downstream, thousand involved in this activity. And also, the income of the farmer also increased. In 1 year, the income become double. So it is really great to know that we also targeting same as like the UN SDG, that we have to increase the farmer income. And what next? So our program is in the 2020, we try to have B30 in Indonesia, mandatory. So now it's still in the process to make a research and so on, and then we hope it will be reach a B30 in the next. And then also the second generation of the biofuel, such like bioethanol or bioafter, and also other things. And how about we are using no palm oil, even though that the first time we using the Tjakrawan, but we found out that the Tjakrawan is not enough, not economy. So we're using palm oil. That is Indonesian produce a lot of palm oil. That we are the first country, the biggest country, production country. And then with the biomass we're talking biomass now. The biomass potential for electricity, it is about 15 watt hours in Indonesia. This is the one that we aim to be there, right? I think this is, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Now let's turn over to Karen, who has substantial experience again in the heavy freight sector in Canada. Karen?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Paul. So I think it's important to frame this challenge because we've talked this morning about, the tremendous progress that's being made in the light-duty passenger car segment, about the, more and more vehicle choice coming online, more and more policy and incentive, and what's really driving that market. But I think it's important to point out that the commercial vehicle market has significant structural and behavioral differences that affect not just the vehicle purchase decision, what vehicles are purchased and why, but the rate at which technology gets deployed within that sector. And I think that is some of the challenge that Paul was alluding to in his opening remarks. So these trucks are designed for application-specific uses. If we think Class 6, Class 7, Class 8, all of these trucks have different duty cycles. They are doing different things. These are vehicles that are purchased to conduct work with the lowest total cost of ownership. So therefore, cost trade-offs are explicitly considered when we talk about an incremental vehicle price or an incremental fuel price or incremental technology. All of these things have serious gating factors on how this technology gets deployed. Fuel economy is the major determining factor in a decision. There's a more rapid vehicle turnover with sophisticated fleets turning over these trucks, in 2 or 3 years. The scale of production is relatively low, therefore it takes some time then to get these cost reductions through high volume production. The chance to do that is a bit more limited. Fuel is typically your second highest operating cost, so you can see how the economics of this are really driving the decision. And these vehicles are deployed, they're relatively, the technology cycle and the technology development cycle is cyclical in response to regulatory frameworks. So when we have longer planning cycles, this impacts how quickly those vehicles get deployed. So what we're seeing though now is that many policymakers, many regulators, and many of the think tanks and academics are advocating that in this sector we're going to need an all of the above approach where fleets are doing what works best for them from an economic and an environmental perspective. And so while this introduces incredible opportunity, there is some risk and there's some challenge associated with this. So we need to economically displace the energy density of diesel, and we have an industry that's historically innovated in response to regulation, whether that is fuel economy, greenhouse gases, criteria, air pollutants. And we need to start deploying these vehicles in material ways. Large deployments, 2025 is sort of this timeline that we are on. So it's important then that we start introducing the vehicles that are commercially available today. And there's no shortage of exciting, compelling product announcements from a whole range of OEMs, new and traditional, about what mix of fuel and vehicles they see in the future. But when you look at this challenge that we're up against and how quickly we need to start deploying these vehicles, it speaks to the fact that we need to start to accelerate the deployment of what is commercially available today. So Westport Fuel Systems works in natural gas engines and vehicles, also in renewable natural gas as well, which offers even more compelling greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so what we found now, and if in the last 6 weeks in the European market alone, we've seen 3 major OEMs, Volvo, Iveco, and Scania, all launch heavy-duty natural gas engine product above 400 horsepower, so suitable for those Class 8 demanding duty cycles. And Westport's technology, HPDI, has seen this momentum with fleets that have, or with OEMs rather, that have deployed it, and OEMs that we are in discussions with, because it offers a high-efficiency diesel comparative solution. There is no compromise in performance, torque, power, etc., and you still get those greenhouse gas emission reduction benefits. About 20% with renewable natural, or with fossil natural gas rather, and then almost 100% with renewable natural gas. And a lot of these vehicles are being deployed in California as well as part of the leadership that state has shown. But we're seeing now in the European market, with this engine now being made available, that there is an opportunity to deploy these commercially available solutions and start to make progress on these really aggressive targets.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. I think we've had three real leaders, global leaders, I would say, in terms of decarbonizing transport. We have one from California looking at more the regulatory and policy side. We have innovation on biofuels in Indonesia, and we have a commercial perspective from Canada focusing on efficiency and clean natural gas. So the floor is open, I believe, for any questions from the audience. But in the meantime, I'm going to take advantage of my rights as a moderator and ask Matt one question. California has been a terrific leader in this whole field of transport decarbonization at the state level. But how have you seen some of your ideas, your proposals catch on, and what type of cooperation do you have with other states, provinces, other countries around the world that are picking up some of the ideas that California has put on the table?
Well, you know, of course, California's emission standards are shared by the federal government right now. We want to continue to work on continuing to pursue those emission standards. But a number of other states around the country, 13 other states, have picked up our emission standards when we initially adopted them, and they've been working with us. So we're going to continue to try and promote just efficiency in engines generally. But with reference to our movement on zero-emission vehicles, that's something that also we worked on with a number of other states around the United States. The governor has signed an agreement with 8 other governors around the United States. Together, collectively, we're going to try and get 3.3 million zero-emission vehicles on the roads in California by 2025, I think is the target. We've been working in particular with the states of Oregon and Washington, and also the province of British Columbia, to try and come along with a uniform highway for electric vehicles and charging stations all up and down the Pacific coast and the United States, so we can deal with those questions about range anxiety, and so that people can travel safely along the entire coast using zero-emission vehicles. We've taken that concept of working with other governments on zero-emission vehicles and promoting them, and we've formed a group called the Zero Emission Vehicle Alliance, where we're working with Norway and Germany, the Netherlands, other states to promote zero-emission vehicles worldwide, and to trade ideas on how we can promote zero-emission vehicles. And then looking at another issue that you've touched on here, we've also been working on a low-carbon fuel standard, reduce the carbon content of fuels and incentivize innovation in the fuel industry. And we've been discussing low-carbon fuel standards with other states and with other countries around the world. I know that there's interest in China and what we've been doing with the low-carbon fuel standard and fuel standards generally. So it is a combination of working with the federal government, having other states around the United States picking up our standards, and then working collaboratively with other governments, both to promote the purchase of zero-emission vehicles, but also to trade concepts. And how do you provide the infrastructure? How do you provide incentives to consumers to pick up on those vehicles and buy those vehicles, so that we can transform our transportation sector to a cleaner transportation sector?
Okay. Thank you very much, Matt. We have a question from our audience now for Karen. Talking a little bit about natural gas, we think frequently about the issue of methane and methane leakage. And do you have any estimates in terms of your analysis for how much methane is leaking in terms of, does that figure into your computation of the overall greenhouse gas benefits of the shift from oil to natural gas?
Sure, thank you. That's a really important question. And so it's critical then that we look at the full life cycle emissions impact of any alternative fuel. And so when we're talking about geologic natural gas, then we are, of course, very supportive of all industry activity, all policy, all regulation that limits methane leakage. There have been product iterations in our own product that minimizes any sort of leakage from the engine or from the fuel system. There are stringent operator practices in place to minimize any sort of leakage from the vehicle or the fueling station. And so it's critical that we minimize any of those leaks, of course, given the climate potential of methane. But it's important to do that analysis for all alternative fuels as well, so that we can really do a very good comparative analysis of where the benefits are going to be.
Thank you, Karen. And just let me put a little plug in for the IEA's World Energy Outlook, which is being distributed tomorrow. It's coming out, the 2017 edition, where we have a special chapter just devoted to the methane issue. We have a question now for Paulus, and I'm sure you've been expecting this question, but this has to do with the whole environmental issue surrounding palm trees and palm oil, the impact on biodiversity. How do you address that issue in the context of Indonesia?
Okay, so first of all, is what we call it the sustainability, right? It's not only environment. For us, it's environment, social, and economy. We are still in the low level, the income country. It's only almost $4,000 US, right, per year, per capita. If you compare to Europe, for instance, 40,000, 10 times. So we are now still struggling with the economy, is the thing. But you have talking about the palm oil. Palm oil first plant in Indonesia is 100 years ago. And who making the plantation is a Belgium and a British company. So it is your grandfather started, and we just following that one, right? It is true, and in the 1970s, Indonesia have a lot of program for the lodging, timber company. At the time, the cutting a lot, and then we exporting most of them to Europe also, the timber. So it's the degraded land. When the degraded land in the 1980s, the government with the private sector, also the smallholders start to plant the palm oil over there in the degraded land already. Right? This is the thing. So regarding talking about the environment, yes, but we have to remember also the palm oil, it is the most, the certified product if you compare to the others. Compared to the European Repsid, for instance, only have one. We have a lot of certification in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in other countries, right? So yes, we are dealing with the environment. Of course, the government started 5 years ago. We have a moratorium not using the forest anymore. Stopped 5 years ago. So I don't think it is any issue. Of course, the peatland, the government formed the team to restore the peatland. This year, they targeted 600,000 hectares. So I don't think we have a problem with the environment anymore, actually, with this one. And also the social economy, the farmers, you see, and we dealing with the 3.2 million family farmers in the the palm oil right now.
Okay. Thank you, Paulus. We're shifting back to the policy space again. Matt, a question for you. We talked a little bit about some of the broader policy issues associated with EVs, but getting down to the micro level, can you explain anything that California is doing now in terms of road infrastructure improvements, reducing peak traffic jam situations, increasing safety measures, other efforts you're undertaking to try to encourage use of public transport, as we would say in the IEA, kind of bend the curve on the kilometer miles?
Well, we are working collaboratively with California Transportation Agency and with a broad range of departments within the state of California to make sure that our transportation systems are really encouraging cleaner transportation use. So, for example, we have been doing a lot more of land use planning to cut down on vehicle miles traveled. We're trying to increase densities in cities around job hubs so that you don't have to travel quite as far. We're trying to do, I'm part of a group called the Strategic Growth Council that is encouraging land use planning in California that encourages active transportation. That is, in addition to driving your own car, what can we do to encourage public transportation? What can we do to encourage bicycle use or just pedestrian transportation to jobs and within communities. So we're really fundamentally looking at the land use planning issues in California. And then in addition, we're looking at what we can do in our transportation system to increase the use of EVs, in addition to offering, for example, financial incentives to individuals who buy zero-emission vehicles. They get access to special roadways, or in California, they have access to quicker paths across our bridges. And so there are certain incentives that we're giving to owners of zero-emission vehicles as a way of encouraging people to look at these alternative forms of transportation. So it really is changing your land use planning, changing your roadway systems to accommodate zero-emission vehicles, to emphasize the fact that we want zero-emission vehicles to be used, but also to encourage other forms of transportation. And we're taking money from our cap and trade program, and we're investing in these programs to promote public transportation, clean public transportation, and also alternative modes of transportation, as I said, such as just walking and bicycle use. We've had that discussion with China. We've said China's moving away from the bicycle. No, we want to move back towards the use of bicycles. So, you know, we're going to meet each other in the middle there. So, but there are a variety of ways that you can approach this issue.
Thank you, Matt. I think we have time for one final question, which comes from the Energy World magazine. Is it possible to completely decarbonize the transport sector without relying on negative emissions technology in other sectors to balance out any residual emissions? I think I may take a quick crack at that, and then if any others want to take a look at it. This is something that the IEA has looked at very carefully in both our 2-degree scenario and as well as our well below 2-degree scenario. And in our 2-degree scenario, in terms of the transport sector, we require about a 54% reduction in emissions from current levels. So that would probably not require any negative emissions technologies to kick in. However, a well below 2 scenario, we're actually looking at about a 90% reduction in emissions, which means not only full electrification of light-duty vehicles, but very, very heavy electrification and alternative fuels for heavy-duty vehicles as well as shipping. I see my colleague Pier Paolo, who is the author of this study, is nodding. So I must have gotten it more or less right. Thank you, Pier Paolo. So if we're looking at a well below 2, definitely we'll be looking at some type of negative emissions from other parts of the energy system. I don't know if any of our other colleagues want to wade into that very technical issue.
I will try. I'd be happy to. And so even if I just think about this from a purely natural gas perspective then, and the ability for these engines and vehicles to run on pure renewable methane from landfills, from dairies, from wastewater sources, the potential is there to get that deep decarbonization. And in fact, I was just flipping through my pages here because the California Air Resources Board has recently certified a fuel pathway from an RNG that is deriving methane for transportation at negative 255 grams per CO2 equivalent per megajoule. So that is an extremely deep low carbon intensity and a fuel pathway that can decarbonize the transportation sector, the heavy duty transportation sector in particular.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for your attention. It was a terrific panel, innovators, and I think we need to pass this message more broadly around the COP and also when we go back to our respective homes. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Don't worry, there's no more panels yet. You do have a rest, you do have a chance to eat, but I want to tell you that please could you keep it until 2:15 only, because we're going to be joined by the chair of the the IPCC in person on the platform. He has no slack in his diary. So if you can take sandwiches, coffee and everything else quickly, please. I apologize we're running late, but I think you know the reasons for that. And we will be going live to Antarctica later in the afternoon.